Well, thank you very much once again for having this opportunity to come and share with you some of the things that have been happening. But I wanted to spend a bit of time in the Bible today, and it's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and I apologize. We've been thinking about ourselves as an organization 40 years in, is what we're doing right. Do you remember the litmus test where if you put a piece of paper, I think it's a red piece of paper, it will turn blue if it's alkaline, a liquid is alkaline or blue, and it will go red if it's acidic. We began to think about the idea, it's probably a bit contrived, the idea of a litmus test, but there is a test. When we were looking at ourselves and trying to understand the way that we work and what we're trying to do in the last 40 years and what we want to do in the future was our treatment of vulnerable children and people part of what God was calling us to, really? Is that something that God is really interested in, or is it something we're interested in? Where has that desire come from? So we began to look at some key questions. Who is God? What is he like? How does that impact his expectations on his people, those who follow him and he calls them to him? How can we respond to that call in the world around us? So we began to look at three questions as an organization. I want to very, very briefly take you what took us a few months in a few minutes. As Paul has said, 45 minutes. Is that right, Paul? Did I miss it? So I wanted to look. We started looking in the Bible and began to see more and more that justice and mercy are very central to God's character. That's what he's like. And at the same time, as being like that, he expects his people to be like that as well. And so I want to take you quickly on a journey. We're going to touch at a few of these stations as we go through to give you a feel for why we think this and why we believe that the Bible does teach this. So let's go into Deuteronomy 10. For the Lord your God is a God of gods, Lord of lords, the great God, mighty, awesome, who shows no partiality, accepts no bribes. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow. He loves the alien, giving him food and clothing. And you are to love those who are aliens, for you yourselves were aliens in Egypt. So this is coming out of the books of the law, the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, the beginning of the Old Testament. And by the time we get to Deuteronomy, we're seeing God is trying to find out a way that his community will live. He's trying to lay down some rules for them so they can understand the constitution that they should live by, if you like. And this is what the characters. And we find God, the writer of Deuteronomy, recording this, reminding the people that God is a great God, great, mighty, and awesome. And there's no question here. He is the great God. He can do what he wants. He does not have to limit himself in any way if he doesn't want to. He is God. He doesn't have to. But he does choose certain things. There are certain characteristics he wants to be known by. One, he doesn't show partiality. He doesn't accept bribes, which is really interesting when we come later on to look at some of the prophets, that he cannot be bribed by burnt offerings. This doesn't work. That's not what he's like. He is actually a God when he defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow. He loves the alien. And we're talking about E.T. here. We're talking about those who come from outside, those who don't belong. Do you understand? It's not, and so we need to really understand that, because the people of God had been aliens, had been in Egypt. They didn't belong to Egypt. They were outcasts in Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt. And he had saved them from that. So he kept reminding them. And this is the basis on which he wants to start this whole new community, a way of living. Let's jump further into Deuteronomy. Again, we see this with God. Do not deprive the alien or the fatherless of justice. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. That is why I command you to do this. Because you were without hope, and I brought hope to you, because you were slaves and I brought you out of slavery, this is why I'm telling you to act this way. Because I have done this for you, this is what I'm asking and telling you to do. So it's emphasis on God's redemptive actions, and that means the people of God should treat people differently to everyone else. So I want to talk about the quartet of vulnerability, which is actually throughout the Bible, and we need to just touch on it very briefly. So he talks about the widow, the fatherless, immigrant, and poor. These 4 keep coming up in the Bible. God has a great concern for these ones, and his concern is that these are going to slip through the gaps. Because of the way the Constitution is written, because of the way he's telling his people to live, there was a great danger that without a male member of the household, you would fall through the cracks. You would not be allowed to have, you'd be excluded from worship. Women could not go to worship without a male member there. The legal system was purely based on male representation, and most forms of employment were not available. We can remember that from Ruth. Do you remember Ruth? We got Ruth and Naomi coming back. They don't know what to do. They have to wait for a male member of the family to take responsibility. And so Boaz steps forward because the other person wouldn't. So where does he go? He goes to the gate of the city where the legal matters are agreed. They needed a male representative to go and represent them. It may sound very old-fashioned these days in our country, but that's God's concern was that this was not going to happen properly, that there would not be a protective system in place. And we get this idea of fatherlessness, which comes this lack of being supported, given protection, risk of exploitation and abuse, marginalized, excluded. So these widows and fatherless, so the widows and the orphans are within this yatom. So yatom is quite an encompassing word in Hebrew. And so throughout the Old Testament, you'll keep this theme comes back. And interestingly enough, Jesus does pick it up himself in the New Testament. So it's really important to understand that in this process, what God is trying to say is there are going to be people who are outside the system, people who are not going to be protected. And I want you to tell specific and special attention to those who are outside, and those, the poor, the marginalized, those without representation. I want you to be careful of them. And that's in when he's starting to set up, when we see in the books of the law. So if you jump to the prophets very quickly, I just want to be very clear about what prophets were not fortune tellers. They did not tell the future. They were saying, if you carry on doing this, it's not going to work out well for you. If you do not follow the way that God wants you to go, then it's not going to work out well for you. Because God is not going to be with you, and he's not going to bless you. You have to do what God is calling you to and asking you to. And he kept reminding God's people, this is the way, remember, and that's their role. So you could look at Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Micah. I'm not going to look at them all. I'm just going to jump quickly into two, just have a look at Isaiah and Ezekiel. And this is an interesting one and a very difficult one to read, really. Your worship is detestable to me, says God, speaking to his people. I won't answer your prayers. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. Seek justice. Encourage the oppressed. Defend the cause of the yatom, the fatherless. Plead the cause of the widow. Again, there's a resonance, isn't there? Throughout the prophets and the picking up on Deuteronomy, there's this resonance going on about what I'm like this. This is what I want you to do to protect those who have not got protection. And then in Ezekiel, this was the sin of Sodom. Sodom and Gomorrah wiped out by God. And he said, she and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy. They did not have any concern for those who were not protected and did not have anything. And that's why they were wiped out. So constantly, God is calling people through his prophets back to remember what was important to him. This is important to me. Please remember that. So if we jump now, you can see we're going very quickly. I hope you're encouraged. We're in the Gospels now, the accounts of Jesus' ministry. And Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees, who worry me a bit. I think I probably shared it before. Pharisees worry me because actually, I'm probably a little bit Pharisaic myself. Because we want to please God. We want to do what's right with God. We want to act in a way which is glorifying to him. And the Pharisees had taken this to the extreme. So Jesus is challenging them. Woe to you, teachers of the law and the Pharisees, you hypocrites. You give a tenth. They were actually giving a tithe of their spices, mint, dill, cumin. But you have neglected the most important matters of the law. The most important thing in Deuteronomy you have completely and utterly missed. You didn't pay any attention to justice, mercy, and faithfulness. So Jesus is calling the people back to the way God wanted them. He's saying to you, even if you're super religious and you're really great and you're trying to do everything to follow God, you've got to come back to this. You've got to understand what the heart of God is. This is what he's like. You've got to understand that. And so we come to the parable we've had read to us, thank you, Sue, and this terrible parable, really, which is quite shocking to those who hear it. So you've got this thing when the Son of Man, when Jesus comes back in his glory, he's going to separate people left to right. And he's going to say to those on the right, come, blessed of my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you. Because I was thirsty, gave me something to drink. I was hungry, gave me some, drink. Hungry, eat. Stranger, you invited me in. I need clothes, you clothed me. Sick, you looked after me. Prison, visited me. And they all reply and say, but when was this? I don't remember it. I don't remember it at all. When were you? And the king says, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. So, that's strange. So then he turns to the people on the left. He said, look, depart from me. Get away from me. You don't even know me. You who are cursed into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. I was hungry. You didn't give me anything to eat. I was thirsty. Didn't bother. Stranger. Couldn't care less. Needed clothing. Go away. I was sick. In prison. You didn't do anything to help at all. And they will say, but Lord, we didn't know. It was just a little girl who was asking for a drink that I didn't help. It was that old man who I couldn't be bothered with. If I'd have known it was you, that would have been very different. If it was clearly you, I'd have done something. I'd have been there for you. So the challenge Jesus is saying, that's just not good enough. That's not good enough. It was me who you were serving when you did that. It was me who you did a disservice to by not doing that. And then it has that terrible, terrible verse at the end, isn't it, about they will go away to eternal punishment and the righteous to eternal life. There is a time, there is a day, isn't there, for this. There is the yes and the no question at the end of this all, for us all. And it's always a frightening thing when you see Jesus' black and white idea of the way the world is. That it's either you're following God or you're not. I want to jump into the epistles very quickly. James and John. So the epistles are the letters from Christian leaders to either other individuals or groups of individuals or churches. And James and John wrote some letters, and here they are. In James 1, we have religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless as this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. There's that resonance again. He's talking about the atom, isn't he? He's talking about those people who are left out, those people who don't have anybody to support them. And then in 1 John 3, we have, if anyone has material possessions, sees his brother in need, but has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? So right through the Bible, we're seeing that the way that God's people are treating those who are yatom, the way they're treating those who are outside, the fatherless, the widow, the alien, is a very important indication of whether they're actually understanding and listening to what God's saying and God's heart. And it's becoming very important because it's God's character. God's character loves justice, and overflows with mercy, and he wants his people to reflect that. And that's especially wants that demonstrated in relationships with the vulnerable and the powerless. So as we as a group began to be encouraged as we read the Bible and say, yes, what we're doing is something in line with the heart of God. It's what God is hungry for. It's what he loves and it drives him. It actually matters to God what you do. So we began to think about some of the children we work with and trying to rethink and make sure that we are looking for those who are right at that bottom of that pile, and began to think about so how do we interpret that? How do we make it part of our work? Began to look, and we've got the pull-up banner there as well. So in a poor and vulnerable community, those who have a disability, children with a disability, will be more vulnerable than others. If they come from the wrong ethnic background, often they are the aliens, they are the outsiders, and they will be those who are more vulnerable than others. If they are girls and not boys, often they will find that they are much more vulnerable. I was just reading a report from India this week where there's quite a lovely story about the way the team has intervened over the last 6 years in the life of this girl and the change we've seen. But she said when she was interviewed for this, and they kept it very much in her words, after all, I did not ask to be born a girl. It wasn't my fault I was born a girl, so why should you punish me for that? Which is very interesting. So girls are much more vulnerable than boys. Children who live in a family unit where there's protection provided for them are much less vulnerable than children who are living on the street or without any immediate adult support and protection. And those who are living with long-term illnesses, HIV, AIDS, Hep B, those sorts of illnesses are much more vulnerable than others. So we've been trying to think about making sure that the work that God has called us to, that we're actually trying to make sense of it, if you know what I mean. How do we make sense of that justice and mercy? Is trying to find the most vulnerable and trying to find those Christians around the world who have passion for this to join with them. But the question is, what does this look like? We began to think, what does it actually look like in practice? Justice and mercy, nice conceptual ideas. And we understand that. But what does it look like in practice? So I'm going to take you on a whistle-stop tour again, and I apologize for the speed of all this, through some of them, of what it actually means. So I want to introduce you to Paul, Rosary Paul, and he was sponsored for many years. When he was first found, he was born with a severe curvature of the spine, as well as other health challenges. And he was not going to school, but through Global Care linking with him and getting him a sponsor, he was able to attend school. And through the years, he's had many challenges. But Global Care have been able to we've had special mobility aids made for him, back braces, all sorts of things to help him get through. Very clever boy, by the way. He started really late because he missed so much school, but is extremely clever and has done very well. Many in Uganda said to us when we took to go on, said, this is not a right thing to do, because the money you are spending on Paul, he's unlikely to contribute very much towards society or towards his family. You should invest in somebody else. Don't waste your time on a child who's so severely disabled, because it's not a good investment. And the questions came, why should we bother with a child who is so severely disabled? Why would a sponsor in the UK want to waste money supporting a child like this? But through the kindness of the sponsor who stayed with us, we were able to support him safely through many challenges. He was 17 at his last birthday. 3 months ago, he collapsed and died in class. 17-year-old. They were right. We wasted our money. Complete and utter waste of money. Waste of investment. Were we wrong? Why? Because God's like that, isn't he? He's got this boundless, reckless mercy. He doesn't care. It's just about Paul and what he needs. And the most wonderful thing to me was at his funeral, many people came to his funeral. There was many people who stood up and said, I was doubtful if it was right to do anything for Paul. But now I see that it's the right thing and that God is like that. And so really wonderful. It was almost like a strange experience for our team. God's reckless mercy and love. Reason we do things like that is because it's what he would do. Because he's like that, isn't he? He wastes his money and time and energy on us. We know that, don't we? What a useless lot we are. Why would you do that? It's because he's like that, isn't he? We've been recipients of that. And that's why we do it. In February, I visited Sri Lanka. First time for many years. There was COVID, political uncertainty, the unraveling of the economy. I don't know if you followed what was going on in Sri Lanka, how terrible it was. The rioting, the turning down of the government, completely overturned the government. The president ran away, and they got the same group back in again now. So it didn't really work out very well. But everybody is much poorer. The strange thing for me was the airport looked very much the same. Hotel looked the same. Interesting enough, the taxi from the airport to the hotel was half the price I normally pay in dollars. So it was good for me, wasn't it? I saved a lot of money because the poor guy who was driving it couldn't afford to not take less to drive me around. Food was okay in the hotel. For the rich, nothing much has changed. But for the poor, it's really changed. The buying power of their salary is a third of what it was before. Cost of food doubling. People are not asking, how to live. They're asking if they can afford to live at all. So it's a very different atmosphere. But whenever I go to Sri Lanka, I'm always met by the marching band of the Morning Star Care Centre, the school that we fund, a non-formal school we fund, Dehiwala, Colombo. So just south of Colombo, on the Gaul Road there, Dehiwala, we actually support the school there. And the school is set up really, it's non-formal, we refuse to have it registered. It's for those children who've missed too much school that can't enter government education. So it's catch-up school sometimes, and for those children who've been in the school, and maybe because of a disability or learning difficulty, the government schools just kick them out, and we pick them up and we educate them and work with the families. So that's the sort of school it is. So I'm always met by the marching band, which is always wonderful, and they've got that fantastic uniforms, very exciting. And they always hold the prefect's investiture for me to come. So it's my official duty is to investigate, to put these new prefects forward. And so this is one of the photos. I don't know if you can see me in that photo. It's one of the photos Hazel likes of me. She thinks it's the right way around. I'm facing away from the camera and a long way from it. So I show that just, usually it pleases her, but she's not here at the moment. So, so here's our head girl of the school, and she's a very gifted dancer. And she has severe learning difficulties. That's why she came to us a few years ago, and we've worked with her. She has two very poor parents who love her a lot, though, which is really exciting to see in that culture, the love that these parents and the value they place on her. And she's grown wonderfully under the care of the Morning Star Care Centre staff. She has loved dance, has always loved dance, and the parents were able to take a little bit of their money and put her into a local dance troupe school. There was a little dance, and she flourished there as well. She became really good at it. So what they did, which was, I don't usually watch these things, but maybe I'm sure a lot of people do. Britain's Got Talent, that sort of thing. Well, Sri Lanka's got the alternative for that. It's funded by an Indian company, came over, and she and her team got through the first round. So when I was there, everyone was so excited and so proud of her because they got through this first round, and they were going to go to the second round. I think she got kicked out the second round, so there is no justice really in the television industry, but there you go. But I wonder for her whether justice and mercy is just a place to be loved, a place to flourish. So God's justice and mercy allowed this girl to really enjoy dance, and also she's now our head girl. We have the Pledge of Allegiance. There she's out the front. She's out of her clothes, and now she's standing at the front there. The head prefect, and all the other ones, they give a Pledge of Allegiance. It's a lovely time, because what they do is the parents bring them in and then put them at the front and give them a blessing and then walk off to the side. So it's a really lovely thing, lovely occasion. And at the end, the very end, the prefects who have been set up walk back to where the parents are standing, kneel before them, kiss their feet, and then the mother blesses, or the father blesses them back. It's quite a meaningful, it's a lovely thing. So at the end, you see right at the end, usually it's all the mothers who come. Very rarely do you see a man presenting, because usually the men are not there at all, they're useless lot. And so what happens is this man was there, and at the end, he was weeping. I mean, he was really weeping. I said, well, what's going on? It's terrible. What's happened to this man? And they said, this is what the head teacher said. This is a useless man. Now, I have had this said many times to me abroad, about useless men. But it's a useless man. He's a drug addict. His wife is a wonderful person who works really hard, gets the money, and he will just waste it. And his wife is working today, so made him and said, you won't get any money from me tonight unless you take your son and present him. So at the end, he said, this is the first time that anybody in public has ever honored me in any way, because I'm such a rubbish person. And he was weeping about that. Maybe justice and mercy is a place where families are valued in a different way, an opportunity for something to change. The same situation with COVID. We've lost a lot of schooling, and the older boys didn't want to come back to school. They'd missed lots of school before, remember, that's why they're with us. And the head of our school, the headmistress of the Morning Star Care Centre went to see a local government vocational school with the help of a local politician for once who did something useful, and actually forced them to allow 6 of our boys, our older boys, to have access to one of their classes, which normally they don't have the academic ability to do it. And this was the making metal frames for windows. Can you imagine? Big business in Sri Lanka, because lots and lots of them go to the Gulf. And so if you get a nice skill, you can get lots of money. And so these boys were doing a 6-month vocational school, and then there'd be 6 months in a company overseen and cared for, and then they would be qualified and could go and get a full-time job. What was so interesting is that the way that was engineered by the head teacher, they have to come back 1 day a week. So they went to the college for 4 days and they had to come back 1 day because the head teacher said to me, we need to keep an eye on these guys. Do you know what I mean? We need to make sure they're loved, they're cared. Any problems they've got, they can come back to us. So they keep coming back. So justice and mercy may just be a future for some vulnerable children, an opportunity to learn a skill that will make them independent. Another thing that's exciting is we have one of the teachers in the school is really excited about craft and painting and things like that. I'm an engineer, so it doesn't work for me. But very excited about it, got the children really into painting pictures and putting stuff together. And then there was announced there was going to be a big competition for the whole district for all the schools. And because we provide a service to the education department, they invited our school to be involved. So off we went with our children, thinking we haven't got a hope. We're up against these really big and impressive private schools. We're against everyone. And we won first, second, and third prize. So maybe justice and mercy is about enabling children to be creative. So it's all slightly different areas. This is I've moved over into Maharashtra State, Kalyan, 3 hours outside Mumbai, in a slum called Pachbol. And there was a young girl her father wouldn't let her go to school, so she used to come to our homework center. So we have children coming to a homework center, and we help them with their education and school. And the team there said, well, why doesn't she just have study aid from us? We'll help her, give her some books. She can come along each day to us, and we'll see what we can do to help her. And hopefully her father will change his mind. The problem was, during the day, she had to go with her mother to her work, and her mother is a cleaner for a rich lady in a swanky house. And so the daughter would sit there in the corner doing her studies with her books and things that we'd given her. The team over there, obviously we haven't, but the team over there have given her. And she was working away, and then the mother came, the rich woman said, after a few weeks, let's have your daughter, who's the same age as my daughter, come together, and we'll see how they're doing academically. Because she knew that her daughter, swanky school, going to kill this poor little girl of ours. What happened, unfortunately, for the rich mother was that the little girl is very clever and did very well. And this really upset the rich lady, who tore her books up, burnt them in the backyard, and said, I don't ever want to see her studying in my house. Why are you wasting time on a girl's education, for starters? And you as Dalits, why waste time on you anyway? It's a complete waste of money, waste of time. You've got to learn your place in life. So this became a problem because, of course, she couldn't study. She came to us in the afternoon, and then in the evening she couldn't study and do homework. She still had to go with her mum, remember, because of health and safety. She couldn't be left in the house on her own. Still had to go, but she wasn't allowed to study. So began to think, the team over there said, well, why don't we get a rechargeable lamp? You can see the picture of it there. She can bring it to the center when she comes, plug it in, charge it up, go home, and then she's got something to do her homework with. And they solved this problem. And they were talking to some of the other girls, and then there were 10 of them in the end who were given. Now, the interesting thing about this, and to my shame, this shows the sort of person I am, really, once I'm out talking to the teams, is they say, John, we knew you would never give us any more money to our budget. We know your zero tolerance of people who mess around with money. So what we did is we decided as a team that we would take 1 month without a salary to pay for these. And now they're not paid well, my team. I'm not a very generous man, really. And so I said, well, why didn't you just give me the chance to say no, please? You know, I know I might be like that all the time, but I mean, I have to say we have reimbursed it, so please, and they've got better. Sadly, they've got better asking now. They're expecting a lot from me now, you see, because I was kind. Don't be too kind. Anyway, so justice and mercy may just be, in this case, overcoming the restrictions of some sort of prejudice because of the wrong ethnicity, because they're Dalits, and the gender is wrong. And there's some small practical things that we can do, and our teams find them and use them to intervene. So some of the changes we're looking for are very simple and not complicated. Justice and mercy can mean very big expressions, but what we're finding is often they're small and different places, and they're different ways. We have been involved in this for 40 years, trying to find a way of expressing God's love, his reckless mercy, and the justice that he's seeking for children around the world. And we can only do that through people like yourselves and the church here. And again, I want to say thank you for being part of that journey over so many years with us. We would love to have you join us. if you felt you could. We've got some, I wouldn't be a charity without lots of literature, so we've brought literature. There is a booklet there that Fiona Carser, who's one of our patrons, wrote from her visits to lots of different projects. They are absolutely free, and I mean free, so please take them away. I don't want to carry them back to the office, so please feel free to take them. That does not apply to the Christmas cards. $3.49 a pack, very cheap, no problem at all. But, and there's literature on the various ways you can support. Please, if there's anybody who feels drawn to the idea of a sponsorship of a child, please, Hazel will be back in a minute, and we'll be manning that stall. Please talk to her. We'd very much like you to join us. But one of the things that we are finding as an organization is that as you see God working, there are some very exciting things happening. I mean, I could bore you, and my wife tells me I bore too many people for too long about things, especially when they come to visit me in the house. I'm not allowed to speak for very long. There's like a timer, and Hazel, that's enough. You can shut up now. Because I could go on and on about what God's doing. God is changing the lives of so many children. He is making opportunities, bringing out of darkness into light, changing communities, changing people, and it's very exciting to be part of what God's doing. So thank you as a church, for being part of that, and thank you for the individuals who are heavily involved and for your support. Thank you.